Hi there. My name is Ken Evans, and I'm excited to for this next episode of DTN Insights, where we get to explore together with a gentleman I think brings a lot of experience to this topic of what does it take to manage digital supply chains, and I'm going to let Corey introduce himself a little bit, and then I'll explain to you a little bit why I thought he was the right person for me to talk to about this. So,
Hey, Ken,
Corey.
thanks. I appreciate you having me on today. So, for the audience, I'm Corey Alemand. I spent the last 35 years of my life straight out of college working for ExxonMobil. Was in a broad range of assignments across a lot of functions. But spent toward the end of my career more time, I would say, in supply chain roles. But got involved in an IT project, and that introduced me to the world of how do you apply IT and digital solutions to solve real world business problems in oil and gas, in chemicals, across manufacturing, supply chain, and order to cash. And it's been a whirlwind ever since. And I retired as chief of supply chain digital for the corporation, and was really able to put that to use, and um, really excited about the opportunities that are out there in supply chain and with digital transformation.
No, that's great. And, Corey and I first met. I was looking back. I think it's been about 10 years ago when I was back running SAP's oil and gas business, and you were involved with the supply chain. I think back then we're more managing SAP, and then
Chemicals, yeah.
um, we sort of lost track of each other a little bit. But then I was always watching your career on LinkedIn and seeing how you were moving into this deeper thought leadership around digital supply chain, and when you got to that chief digital officer for your new value chain organization or whatever, I thought, wow, it's pretty cool. And I thought it'd be great to have a conversation with you. And I was particularly impressed when you and I got reconnected a few months ago, and you started talking about some of the insights you'd had around, working with different AI companies and the like, and how important data was for that. So that's why we're here, folks. Is we're just going to have a conversation and see where this goes.
Yeah,
So
sounds great.
okay. Hey, well, listen. So I think one of the things that when we met a couple months ago, I told you we were working on creating this new operational decisioning platform for really it's the marketing and distribution of fuels value chain, right? And I know that was a subset of what you were, responsible for in the overall value chain. But as we talked about that, thought that was pretty interesting that, you know, to me, I walked away from that understanding that, hey, if I'm gonna optimize, try to do anything within this value of the chain, I need to be able to, look upstream and downstream. But I'd welcome your perspective, on that, and what's been your experience trying to make that work in the real world. So
Yeah, I think the days of companies just relying on their own internal data and IT systems isn't going to cut it. Today, the way, especially large, sophisticated companies, especially what you see in oil and gas, chemicals, and industries like that, there's so many partners and third-party logistics providers and other entities that are involved, that if you don't have visibility into what's happening in that extended ecosystem, you're not going to get the heads up to make critical decisions and not have the information you need to to win in the marketplace. And there's a huge challenge as to how you make all that happen in a way that is timely, because fax machines and emails and emailing spreadsheets back and forth just doesn't cut it anymore. And so that's, to me, what all the leading companies are really going after, is how do I connect all these things beyond the walls where I have control and operations, but where I'm critically dependent on partners to make things happen. How do I bring that all together in a way where the data talks to each other? Because the data is going to be the thing that's going to trip you up as to how you make sure you're talking about the same thing, and that it all relates to each other is a big part of the challenge for sure.
Yeah, no, I certainly recognize that, in the history of DTN, we sort of, we started off trying to address this problem, right? And I think we did a decent amount of it trying to just be able to do the translation, but still
Yeah.
today, unfortunately, a lot of it's still based upon, old technologies of moving things with FTP or emailing back and forth and the like. And that just doesn't match the speed of decisioning that is required today in today's much more dynamic market, right? So,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
what I try and tell people, the way I think about it is, it's table stakes for a company to need to have low operating cost. And so, you want to do more with less. That's how you're going to be more efficient than your competitors in your competition. And a part of that is also, well, the processes and the systems that I use need to be operating at the best they can operate and be efficient and effective to make all that work. And that's kind of the mechanics of what you need to try and get to that lower cost. But if you're going to win in the market and be better than your competition, it's really about what decisions and actions your company, your people take on a day in and day out basis to actually react to things that are going on and get out ahead of the market or whatever. And, that's the part where how do you enable being able to make smarter, faster, and better decisions, but then you've got to action it. And then that links back into your processes and your systems that execute it. And so you've got to work all those pieces to really make this thing come across. And, where everybody's chasing the holy grail right now of AI, because how can you help or make AI be part of the team? And where you have decisions that are deterministic, where you're effectively, it's a flow chart, it's very straightforward. And, looking at the risk profile, what can you turn over to AI so that you get the speed of AI recognizing the situation, making the decision, and then taking the action and pushing that through, which frees up your resources and your key people to focus on the higher risk things or the things that need, human intervention. But you don't get there overnight. I mean, this is definitely a crawl, walk, run journey. But at the end of the day, it all begins with data and that interconnectedness. And what platform are you going to pick, which is probably part of where we want to go today, because literally every company, including DTN, everybody wants to be the platform.
Right.
And speaking as a customer of IT for many, many, many years, everybody wants you to pick them. And it's hard for companies sometimes to figure out what is the horse I want to bet on. But you can also fall into the trap of always chasing technology.
Yep.
And being on that bleeding edge sometimes can be extremely uncomfortable and expensive if you make a mistake or it doesn't pan out. And so I think most companies that I talk to in kind of the consulting that I've been doing for the last little bit, and internally when I was working for ExxonMobil, is coming to how do you pick that platform, and is it going to meet what you need, and what platforms do I need to stitch together, I think is the other really big challenge that companies face.
And I think that's a critical part, right? I mean, and I think long gone are the days of, it being a single platform, right? I mean, I was in the days way back when, hey, we just put everything on a single global instance and that'll solve all of our problems. Well, that gets back to that sort of internal conversation. Maybe I could solve it internally, but how do I connect it effectively to all the other different trading partners that I have to deal with, right? And so today it really comes down to being a platform, and then for what data. And I like to think about it as more of a, for certain assets, right? Physical assets. There's a concept of that digital twin, right? That's been out there for a long time, but I think we're still a long ways. I've not seen. I'd welcome your insight of, who has the digital twin, because it seemed like, at least when you're trading for things like terminals and tank trucks and products, and everybody has their own definition of that, and they haven't been able to reconcile all that. But
yeah, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. These are the internal conversations in all the big companies. I was fortunate in my time at ExxonMobil to be a part of a group called 0100, which is all the world's leading supply chain thought leaders. And literally every major company is there. And this is the conversation. Like, how do you navigate picking platforms? What platforms do you link together? Where do you put the digital twin? You try and build something yourself, and there is no one right answer. But I would say, in my experience, one of the challenges is not all companies are good at maintaining and building things internally. And, some companies are better off, buying services, buying something off the shelf, partnering with a company. Because I've seen both be very successful. But in either case, it's not easy. And, the partner, if you pick a partner, then it's a question of, are they going to bring the features, functions, keep up with all the things so that you're moving forward as technology develops. And is the partner too niche, or, are they going to be able to cover the expanse of your business? And I think for maybe smaller to mid-sized companies that are kind of in a smaller subset or a more focused set of industries or activities, that's probably a little easier. I think it gets really hard when you get to large integrated oil and gas companies, for example, where there's upstream, there's downstream, midstream. There's a lot of pieces there, and finding one platform or company that can stitch all that together and do all the things often becomes a challenge, regardless of the data. Just
right.
Because with DTN, where you guys are really well entrenched in your markets, if someone's got some other businesses, well, can your platform do that for them, or do they need to do something somewhere else? And then how do they make sense of that? Like, those are all critical questions that supply chain leaders and IT leaders have to address as part of their strategy, their digital strategies.
Yeah, it reminds me of the work that back shortly after we met, I was doing some thought leadership work, and I was fortunate enough to spend some time with the World Economic Forum's, sort of digital, their digital strategy type stuff. I mean, I know I'm old, but it was fascinating to have that conversation, because it came down to sort of that, almost a network of networks, right? Just get beyond thinking you're going to be the platform for everything, but it's like, how do you pick the key networks? And maybe they're centered around sort of that asset of, hey, for these sets of assets, the digital twin resides here in this network, but I got to be able to relate it to this network that has these other set of assets, and so on, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was that's a fascinating, and you're right. It seems like, forever ago we had those conversations, but it was in that room. I can still remember it, but we're there. I think the technology is getting us there, and certainly AI is helping in a couple ways. One, it's forcing it, right? Because if you don't have the data, clean to start with, it's going to be a challenge, but also AI can help clean up some of that. Some of the new ontology tools and everything else are really pretty cool. So
yeah, I mean, that's, the data is always something that can trip you up. Where you were going with the kind of, or we've talked offline a little bit about upstream and downstream impacts. And so,
right.
especially like a large integrated oil and gas company, if something happens in fuels, Well, that has, impact back to refining
Mhm.
operations. That has impacts to what you're doing. If you're doing oil and gas trading operations, all of those things are interconnected. And so, I think one of the exciting things is what's developing with agentic AI, and how you can have these agents that are only kicking in when certain things trigger them, that could then, bring over some upset. If a hurricane is coming and hitting in a market, and it's going to disrupt the fuel distribution to the fuel
Mhm.
terminals of the fuel markets, what does that mean to what we need to do back in refining or even in trading? And how do these AI agents help orchestrate that in the background? And I think there's a ton of work going on in this space, and I know many of the key uh, software providers are all racing to figure out how do they put in agents to help manage that across. Um, and that's going to be really interesting to see where that goes and what that can do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the conversations you and I had, was that, it's interesting to me that, what excited me, when I came to DTN, was learning that, at least, in the US, that, we touch, right? 85% of all the transportation fuels moved around. So the ability, the insights of knowing what those ebbs and flows of the supply and demand are, and who the players are, that gives us some great ability to help our customers, build some of these agents, right? Not exclusively on our data, because they're going to have to combine data from, they have their own proprietary data and other sources and like, but I think that gives us a real opportunity to build those agents. So why don't
Yeah,
you share? I mean, I read, I just, every day I read stuff about, data's the oxygen for AI and those sort of things, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
it's, you know,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I would say, you know, if there was a new company that could quickly spin up to be a big player, they would have an advantage because they would build all their systems on the latest technology, and it would be architected a certain way. One of the things I was personally involved in my career, and talked to a lot of other colleagues who worked in other large corporations, they're all sitting on very large legacy systems, right?
mhm.
ERPs that you're familiar with, I
Yeah.
believe, that serve a great purpose and do a lot of great things, but are not architected for today's environment, right? And as you know, upgrading those big ERPs, no matter what brand of ERP it is, those are not insignificant projects that can suck all of the time and the resources away from investing in the new AI tools and stuff like that. But until you do that, whether however you may go about that ERP upgrade, or how you update your legacy applications, you've got to eventually get to this common data platform and ontology, so that when someone refers to an event or a place, everyone is talking about the same thing, right? And then it's how do you augment that with truck track and trace, and barge and ship AIS track and trace, and tank levels at the terminals, and all those pieces, the demand sensing, and what's happening with fuel sales, and all the, like, bringing all that data together and leveraging that for whatever type of decision intelligence you're going to go after. Because back to my earlier comment, where I think companies can really differentiate, it's not enough today to go have a process improvement project to fix some business process. Like,
Right.
that's well beyond table stakes at this point. Now it's, how do I leverage all of these data assets and take advantage of these new tools, so that I know about a problem sooner, I make a decision about it faster, and I make a better decision than competitors, and then I can take action on it faster than competitors.
Right.
And how do I leverage AI to help me do that and elevate the work so that, my people in my organization are focusing on the big things and the things that really need their attention and are high risk. And I let a lot of other stuff just automatically happen. And, you really got to have your data and your systems and your processes humming in order to make that a reality.
It's interesting. Both of you and I have, large company backgrounds, right, as well. And I've been a, large company oil and gas and large company tech, and now I'm, smaller tech. But I talk to a lot of customers that are smaller, and they're wondering how do they compete? Is there an opportunity, right? Because it used to be he who had the most steel won, right? Sort of a type of a thing in this industry. Are you seeing any? I don't want you to give away the secrets,
No,
but are you seeing anything to where this AI and the data and access to data is starting to create some new competitive advantage for smaller players?
I actually think AI is a bit of a democratizing agent, that it levels the playing field a bit. And as I said before, newer companies don't have the technical debt and legacy system baggage and have an opportunity to put new things in that are kind of built right the first time, so to speak.
Yeah,
And so, in my knowledge of kind of the big companies in oil and gas, everybody's all faced with funding big ERP landscape, because these ERPs are connected to everything at these
right.
companies, and that's what was needed at the time, but that's kind of sucking some of the oxygen away from doing some of the fun things. And so, in some ways, I think smaller and medium-sized companies have a little bit of an advantage that they may not have as much baggage. And if they're coming in, I think the other big democratizing thing was, just software as a service,
Right.
because now the availability, I can call up a software provider and something can be spun up really, really quickly,
Right.
if I want to do that. And you don't have to have these big giant projects installing stuff in your data center and all that stuff. And so I think it does level the playing field a bit, for
Okay.
some of the smaller companies.
Well, that's awesome to hear, and I agree with you. I think there's an opportunity because they can move quicker, they can move faster, they can get on the latest technology, and then let's face it, the reason why many of those partners are in the value chain in the first place is because big companies like yours at ExxonMobil and me when I was at BP, we invited in, we needed the players to be able to give us the supply chain agility, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of variability in there, right? And we couldn't manage all that. So,
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would say too is that it's easy to get enamored of the tech and, to chase the shiny objects. None of this minimizes the need, for change management. And, in some of the working groups I was in over the last couple of years, and the conversations with my colleagues at other companies, both in oil and gas and cosmetics and consumer goods,
right,
is all about, how do you lead the organization through the technology change? And that gets to the whole thing about trust and, are the robots coming to steal my job? And I'd say that's been one of the big challenges I know I personally faced, and the things I was trying to lead from a digital perspective is getting people over and willing to want to participate in something where you're bringing some new AI tool or decision intelligence platform, and there's kind of a vested interest of that employee to say, I don't trust it, or I don't want to use it. And in my experience, we found where some of these systems, if there's no penalty for non-use, it's not going to get used.
right.
So if these things start getting connected, and if they don't use it, then someone's going to know about it, or it's going to have some downstream impact, help with adoption. But you also need to build that trust. And some of the conversations I've had with in my consulting business when I've been advising software companies is, you've got to build your AI tools such that they provide, show their thinking, show help the show their work, right? So
Right.
that the
Right.
users can understand how you got to that decision so that they can build trust. And you basically need to take the black box of AI and make it clear and transparent so that people have that trust in what the platform is doing. And typically, I've seen some success stories in my career on when you do that effectively, and then people it's life changing. We've introduced some tools at times that took away like 38 hours a week of work for one employee. And it was life changing. Like, they literally burst into tears, right? Because they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can go work on something else, right? And
Right.
so, but that change management, don't underestimate that part. And I think that's where
Yeah,
a
and
lot
I
of
think overcoming that fear, as you said, it's even myself, right? A couple years ago, I was, I had to pick it up personally, and just how I use AI in my daily life now, and I'm sitting here imagining, it's like, how did I do this without it, right? Because, but you have to learn to get to trust it a little bit and know how to interact. But there's those people that can pick it up and realize that this is just like any other tool. He who learns to use it best is going to win, right? Type of situation. And it's not likely to replace anybody, because I had conversations, at the companies that they're talking about, okay, well, yeah, we're going to build these agents, but we're still going to need somebody that coaches them, right? They're going to sort of manage a portfolio of agents, and how do they coach them and train them and figure that out, right? So that's
Yeah, but you actually hit on a point that has been in some of the industry groups that I've been involved in. A huge topic of conversation is around, the resources that you need in your digital team. And I can buy a lot of resources. I can buy coders. I can buy a lot of IT jobs. They're a commodity, or now they're being replaced by AI in some cases. But what I can't replace are the experts in the business who know how the business works, the subject matter experts.
right.
And the problem is those roles, effectively, that's how I was born into who I became in my career. Was I was a business person and I got sucked into an IT project, and I was bilingual. I knew how to translate my business experience into what the IT needed to be. And so those kinds of roles are born in companies. And don't underestimate what it takes to build that and maintain that, because even though a lot of the pure IT things are commodity, you've got to have that expertise, because someone's got to tell the AI and the decision intelligence tools, and they when does something change that I now need to bring something new in?
Right.
When do I need to change the algorithm, or it's starting to drift, right? Because it's actually going to create a whole new set of jobs in companies to monitor like the efficacy of the
Yeah.
decision. And one of the things I've counseled companies on is, if you do bring decision intelligence into your platforms, you have to have, what do you call them, cockpits or some kind of UI, something that allows the people that are managing the platform in a company to know what's going right, what's not going right, what do I need to adjust, especially as AI takes on a bigger role in
Right.
some of those things. And again, that gets to the trust, but also making sure that it's still doing what you think it's doing, before you wake up and find out something bad
Yeah.
happened.
So instead of replacing you, if you're that expert, it really gives you the opportunity. It frees you up to have that broader conversation, consider the things outside that scope that usually probably drove right past you anyway, and you never saw it. Right.
Right.
Now you can consider that and say, hey, this is how this impacts that. So
Yeah.
listen, Corey, this has been a great conversation. I just wanted to, what would be, any parting words of wisdom that you would have for companies that are starting to embark on this journey, and you've given a lot. You've given a lot throughout this, but if particularly if you want to bring it down to participants in that, refined fuels distribution space, which is our primary audience, what would be your advice to them? So.
Well, first, you can't afford to not jump in. And I counsel people frequently on don't keep chasing technology. I feel like you're better off picking something, even if it's not the perfect partner, but someone you trust, in getting in and starting to experiment, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And being thoughtful about I think the second big thing is being thoughtful about what you pick and where to start and how big you go at it. You want to have a vision that's bold enough that what you're going to do is going to be meaningful and transformational, but you can't swallow that in one bite. And so being thoughtful about understanding the platform and the data and the use cases that are going to bring some value and prove it out. But you got to get started, because things are not slowing down and technology is rapidly evolving, and you need to get in there. And while I think you can't ever predict where things are going to be, and so you have to be able to at least be on the road and be willing to adjust, as needed.
No, that's great. So, well, listen, Corey, this has been fantastic. Appreciate the time. I'm sure the audience has gained a lot from this. And next time I'm down in your neck of the woods, we'll need to get together and just
That's great.
What's next.
Invite me up to Montana.
Okay, I will do that. You're welcome anytime, my friend. So, okay,
right.
thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Corey.
Thank you.